Is your program evaluation racist? In the past 3 years, organizations have brought renewed energy and focus to addressing racism and inequality in their organizations, their programs, and their communities. But how you measure your results can have as much impact on equality or inequality as your programs and policies themselves. Today, we're going to talk about how your program evaluation might not be aligned with your organization's values.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about program evaluation. Now, you know that that's one of my favorite things, but program evaluation itself might be perpetuating inequality, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to be meeting with leaders who are working to undo some of the ways in which program evaluation might have been at odds with their organization's goals to promoting equality. And we're going to be talking about some of the ways that program evaluation practice can be rooted in the same kinds of white supremacist goals that sometimes underbed all of program design. So how could we be inadvertently undoing our own good work? My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting. I'm joined today by my good friend and co-host, Cynthia Rojas. Good morning.
Hi, Peta. How are you?
I'm good. We're talking about my favorite thing today.
I know, Peta, that was some opener. Is
Thank
your
you.
evaluation racist? I was like,
You're going to be surprised. So I want to welcome all of our viewers and listeners. If you're joining us live, please let us know you're here in the comments. Let us know your name and where you're joining from. And if you are listening to our podcast from Australia and around the world, I want to welcome you. So today we're talking about program evaluation, which is, let's start there. Program evaluation is how do you know your stuff is working? Right. Like ideally a systematic way of understanding that your program is working. But I look at it as like, how do we hold ourselves accountable for running a good program?
Yes.
That's what I think it is. Yeah.
And this is important because in nonprofits, we exist to better people's lives, their environment, the world. And if we're not doing it, first of all, we should be assessing if we're doing a good job. And if we're not, things have to change. We're talking about lives.
Yeah, that's how I think about it, right? We're talking about lives, and we're usually talking about lives of people who have less power.
Yes.
So yes. But let's talk particularly about programs that deal with poverty, right? Because that's right. That's the area I'm in the most. Most of these programs were developed with some assumptions about how poverty works, right? That are baked in. And one of those is that poverty is caused by moral failures, right? Failures of character. And that a way to address poverty is essentially to train people who are living in conditions of poverty to act more like wealthy people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that has underpinned the anti-poverty effort since the beginning of time, right? But it is basically problematizing the people and not the systems, which is another thing that we talk about a lot in this show. Like poverty isn't caused by poor people. It's caused by systems of inequality, right? That allocate resources unequally. So if your program evaluation follows the design of your program, and your program is fundamentally problematizing people with less power, your evaluation is going to do the same thing. Right. So
that's big. I'm thinking. This is me thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And
But
yeah.
there are some people in the poverty ecosystem who are really trying to end it.
Right.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about that next. But I was struck by the comment about we try to get poor people to act like rich people. Can you give me an example?
Yeah. All of workforce development training for many, many years has said, let's train people to dress professionally, present themselves professionally, behave certain ways in interviews, right? Wear their hair certain ways. And these ways of being and acting were developed in workplaces before any people of color were there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so, these racist ideas are baked into these workplaces. And the entire welfare to work program was basically teaching women of color to act these ways. I had a conversation with somebody recently who said, somebody who works in the youth career pathway space said, you're the third or fourth person I've talked to recently who has said, why are we training the young people to interact with the employers? Why don't we train the employers to interact with young people?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something that I happen to know based on my experience is that many times the people who are interviewing aren't trained to interview.
No, nobody's really trained to interview.
Right.
And interviewing is so irrelevant. I mean, unless you're interviewing for a job as an interviewer, for the most part, interviewing is irrelevant to your actual job.
Right. Right. Yes.
So the whole idea of like getting good at interviewing is a little problematic. It's just another way of like, creating one more hurdle for people. You don't just have to learn to do your job, show up, be nice to the customers, but you also have to learn this very strange artificial way that, people interact before you get the job.
Yeah. But sometimes, I because I do teach people how to interview, I think you also have to, until people come around, you have to play the game, right?
Right.
Or dismantle it really fast, but that's not happening fast enough.
No. Even now, right? Even now, when so many employers say we just can't find enough people to hire, they don't change their practices.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So everything that we were measuring in those programs, right, was essentially saying like your cultural practices are bad and irrelevant. Your way of making sense and interacting with people is bad and irrelevant. And what we're going to measure is your ability to mimic these other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, right, as opposed to, how do we measure the ability of our programs or our employers to meet the needs of
Mm-hmm.
these potential workers, right? How do we measure the ways in which the entire environment is designed to perpetuate inequality, right? We're not looking at things like transportation equity or environmental justice or, right, the extra costs of living in communities of color. Like we don't have ways of measuring that. We don't do program evaluations on that, right?
Right.
That's because we've like problematized the least powerful people in this narrative.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I've been having an interesting experience. I'm not going to name the employer. It's a major employer where I live. And depending on how busy they are, they cut their employees' hours.
Yep.
And I have been very angry about this because my nephew works at one of these employers, and his gas to get to work is still the same price, right?
Mm-hmm.
His lunch is still the same price. And yet there are some days that he makes less because he works less hours, but he
Yeah.
still has to go to work. So he
Right.
won't have an 8-hour day, he'll have a 4-hour day.
Yep.
And so there's so much unfairness in that.
Yeah. Imagine trying to arrange childcare.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Work like that. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and forget about, you're not earning. I mean, how does somebody become financially stable when they don't know what their paycheck is going to be next week?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so it's angered me because I'm like this, I see it clearly.
Yeah.
And so right now, I don't have the time or the energy to go fight this big employer. So I make him lunch every day. So that he doesn't have to buy lunch. That's
That is a nice example of community care, right?
right. That's how I relieve some of the financial burden on.
Yeah.
And by the way, during peak season with this employer, he will work 13, 14-hour days, which
Yeah.
means that he has to buy more meals, right? We
Right.
eat at least twice in a 14-hour day. And so there's unfairness in that. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, wow, this is, I get pissed off.
Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
needs to evaluate them.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we evaluate like your nephew and his ability to get this job or retain this job. We don't evaluate employers and systems about the quality of jobs that they're providing. And that's partly because we just think the market is going to take care of this.
Yeah.
Right? I think that fundamentally that is why not-for-profits have program evaluation and for-profits usually don't. Sometimes they have the social enterprise and they also have program evaluation. But we usually just say, like, if you're making money, you're doing it, right? Like there is
Yeah.
only one metric. Yeah.
Yes.
So I also want to talk about the fact that data collection is extractive. I have strong feelings about this.
Oh,
Right?
tell me.
Just getting studied takes time, right?
Yeah.
And the people who are filling in the questionnaires, right, providing data, these are usually the most vulnerable people, right? I was talking to somebody yesterday about evaluating a workforce development training program, and we said, well, we might have to follow up with the participants. We might send them a survey at 30 days, 3 months, and 6 months and see how they've retained in their jobs. That's how most people would do it. And there's nothing really wrong with that, except that we're asking for their time, right? Over and over and over, we're asking for their time. And there is an assumption that the information and the time of people who live in conditions of poverty is free or worthless. And that it's okay to make this ask over and over and over. It's not. They own their time and they own their information just as much as we do. Here's where it's especially bad, problematic, makes me so mad, is if you do that. And then you take that information and you hide it somewhere, right? You go into lower income communities or communities of color and you get a whole lot of information and then you write a report in, really wordy academic language and heaven forbid you publish it behind a paywall. Okay, that's theft. That's just outright theft.
Yes, I love that.
I mean, I can't think of anything more extractive. I talked to a woman once who ran a program in Boston, and this maybe particularly happens in Boston because there's so many universities and so many people who want to study things. But she was running a program, and because she had really good program evaluation intentions, she started to hand out a survey. And then and this was a group of young mothers of color and their kids. And she overheard one of the mothers say, "Oh, there they go, studying us again." To her credit, she went right back around, picked up all the surveys and, and put them away. But yeah, you got to keep that in mind. Like, these people get studied all the time because they've been pathologized. Right?
Yes. And
all of the studies and literature before you did that. Yeah.
I mean, there are tons and tons of forms to fill out when you're receiving services from a community-based organization, and I get so overwhelmed
Yep.
just looking and sifting, and so I in my previous work, I used to like analyze like what's the data that we need to gather,
Yep.
and the number of people who say, "Oh, well, that would be good to know." Oh my! Well,
Yeah, I hear that all the time.
yeah,
I'm curious about this. That would be good to know.
yes,
I don't give up information for that reason.
yeah,
I
yeah.
once worked in a building in a organization that had slightly outgrown its space, and
Mhm.
so I had an office in a building next door to the main building, and I would have to go walk back and forth when I printed things. And
God,
yeah, and at one point, which was good, it's a little bit of a little bit of exercise throughout the day. Um, at one point, I was kind of playing around with the database and like doing a little bit of cleanup, and put in some of my own data and then printed it up. And as I'm walking back to my office, a gust of wind started to take these papers, right, and take them away. And I had this moment of incredible clarity, how I felt about it when my data was in the database versus all of these hundreds of program participants whose data we put in the database and then don't really think twice about it, right?
wow.
And I became so much more cautious, so much more rulesy, so much more minimalist about like if I wasn't really, really sure that I was going to send you a postcard, I probably didn't take your street address, right?
Oh
And I
yeah.
would have people say, like, oh, should we just take their social security numbers just in case? Absolutely not. No way, not doing it. Like, no
No.
way. What would you put in your database? And then walk around your office and see like, well, can we see this data on people's screens?
Yep.
Right? If I walk up behind somebody in their cube, do I see everybody's personal information? Right?
Yeah. And it's what you're lifting is really interesting, because one of the things I'm thinking about is, oh, and we have a comment from Myra who's watching us through LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Hi, Myra. And she's saying that's the problem with so many systems.
Yeah.
And she's right. And as I'm hearing you speak, Peter, I'm thinking, I haven't filled out a set of forms in so long,
No.
right? And yet, if I were to ask others who receive services through an
Yeah.
organization, I'm sure that
Well, it's how like dignity and indignity are built into these systems, right? I mean, we are essentially wealthy and powerful people, and we interact with the systems that are designed for that.
yeah,
And so those systems, for the most part, respect our time and energy,
yeah,
right? If you go to the Social Security office, which is a social service agency, but wealthy people are enrolled there, you are going to have a dramatically different experience than if you go to the Department of Transitional Assistance. Kind of
I
the
love
same
that.
thing, but only poor people go there, right?
Yeah,
And so those systems are kind of designed, I say they're designed to make you insane. That's part of it.
I think so.
Um, yeah. And they're designed to, um, well, they're designed to make you insane because that's how they maintain poverty. Um, they're designed to be humiliating. And one
Yeah,
of the things that we used to hear, I hear a lot less of this now than I did, say 20 years ago, was people are earning the services of this program. And when we make the forms and the application process onerous, what we're doing is weeding out people who won't have the stick with it to complete our program, right? And so I used to see application processes that deliberately had people come back multiple times, deliberately had people collect different pieces of information and created kind of onerous interview systems because we thought, well, if somebody has the interest in our program, dedication, whatever, to make it through this process, they're more likely to stick in our program, right? And make it through our program. And why did we care about that? Well, one, because one of the metrics that we were reporting to our funders on was program completion. And so we only wanted completers. What we're doing, though, is completely letting ourselves off the hook for making a program that people can complete, right?
Yes.
Or that people want to complete, or that is so valuable to them that they are going to complete, right? We're letting ourselves off the hook for reducing their barriers to completion, right?
Yes.
By saying, well, we're just going to take people who show us in these roundabout ways that they have less barriers. Myra is saying she rarely fills out surveys. I'm with you. I used to fill out every survey I came across because I was curious about how other people designed surveys. And I have also just hit complete survey fatigue. I don't do it anymore. Yeah.
I have not. I do complete surveys, but I'm also completing surveys about customer service. And I'm a big believer that we should have good customer service. And so I fill those out. But I'm not getting applications and forms 40 pages long or 30 pages long asking me for the most intimate information. And so there is a big difference. I'll tell you which survey I love the most.
Yeah.
The bathroom survey. The one with the emojis. Can everybody do that? You got 5 emojis from face not sad, not happy to
happy face. And that is my absolute favorite survey too. The first place I saw it was at Heathrow. Outside of security. How was your airport? Yeah. And I've seen it in airports. I love it. That's my favorite survey in the world.
Yeah. It's the easiest one. It's right next to the wash bin or the sink. And what else do they need to know? Was I happy in that bathroom? That's it. And hopefully I do want to lift it. I do want to take it up a notch because we are talking about nonprofits, but oftentimes this need for data is going to the feds or is going to a funder. So it's being driven by another entity in this hierarchy. So talk about a system, right?
Right.
And so nonprofits have struggled for years just gathering the data. And what we need to do is also put the accountability on the feds. I would love to know what the feds do with all these reports. I want to meet the person that reads them. I do.
That would be an interesting job.
Yeah. Oh,
And
we got a comment from Myra. Let's show it. My boss is data driven. And I'm more of a people-to-people person. So when she asks me to survey our principals, I cringe. So we have a deal. I create conversations, which makes it more personal and not about systems. That's a great idea.
There is
conversation.
Yes, there is a lot that you can do about, let's say we need some information, but how can we make it be part of our relationship building as opposed to an isolating and sort of othering form, right? So can I take a template and sit side by side with my client, and can the two of us fill it in together? And that's a very different dynamic from take this form and do it in the waiting room and come back when you're ready.
Yeah.
Right? Can you involve your program participants in the design of your evaluation? Can you ask them what it's going to look like when this program works and include that in your evaluation? Can you include them in sense making? When you look at your data, can you include them in how you read this information and how you interpret it? So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Make them a part of it. I can't wait to hear from these guests. And you said one of them is leading the effort.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking to some guests who are doing, I would say there's a continuum here from anti-racist evaluation to liberatory evaluation, right? And we have been talking about some of the smaller but still impactful practices that you could implement to make your evaluation less racist. In the next few weeks, we're also going to talk to some leaders who are reinventing evaluation and doing it from a liberatory standpoint and doing it in ways that center communities of color and Indigenous communities. And they are going to present to us whole different ways of understanding what does working mean? Like, how do we define success in this program? When traditionally, like the programs that serve communities of color, success has been defined outside of the communities of color, right? So when you say, like, we're going to define success from the perspective of the participants and from the perspective of this marginalized and racialized community, that's already pretty radical. But they are going to talk about how they are essentially reinventing in different ways their evaluation approaches and systems to allow for completely different ways of approaching program evaluation.
I can't wait.
It's going to be really, really, really interesting stuff.
Oh, we have a viewer. Myra said that she knows what the feds do with the reports, but she won't tell us her job.
Well, we know a couple of things they do with it, right? And it's not all bad. So one is they write reports to Congress so that they can get more money for these programs, right? I mean, and I do believe in that. I do think when you run a not-for-profit and you run it with the money and the energy of taxpayers, community members, donors, you do have a responsibility to demonstrate that you are using those funds to reduce or eliminate the problem, right? I do believe in that. And the other thing they do, honestly, is civil rights compliance monitoring. Like, they are making sure that you are not just taking their money and only serving white communities. I mean, we kind of like laugh about that now, but these were real problems, right? This is a real problem in US history. And so when they're asking, and people get so frustrated about like the race, ethnic categories on, data collection plans for the federal government, like, they just have to just align with the census, because somebody is going to check and be like, how did you be in this census tract that is predominantly people of color but serve all white people? Like, that's a reasonable thing to check. So.
Yeah, no, and I, like you, and I appreciate that you're lifting this, because we are evaluators, right? And what you and I are doing in this conversation is being very transparent about the problems within the system, although we are part of the system. And so my hope is that everyone can do this. But I also believe in evaluation. I became an analyst because I had wondered as a young kid, who's coming up with these numbers? Where are these numbers? Because they didn't represent me. And I was about 10, 11 years old. And I remember seeing a commercial. Remember commercials, Peter?
Yeah. Now you would jump up and run quickly into the kitchen and listen for the show to come back. Yeah.
And I used to love the commercials that would say 1 in 7 people, blah, 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 right? And I remember thinking, who's counting that? Because in my young brain, I thought someone was standing somewhere counting how many, or every 10 seconds, that was the one. Every 10 seconds, blah, blah, blah happens. And I'm like, who's counting that? And so and then as I got older, I realized that people who were doing the counting didn't look like me.
Right.
And I felt I got this call to do something about that, to be at that table. And so I say this because evaluation is very important to me. Oh, we have another comment.
Christine says, it's always frustrating to have to align with the census. So when there are issues with the collection of demographic data for the census that lead to lack of participation for many communities. Yeah, because it doesn't reflect how people think of themselves, right? So one of the things that I have done is told organizations, well, why don't you just collect the data in the way you want and then clean it to reflect what the feds want, right?
Yeah.
So if you, like I used to work in Boston and we'd have a lot of people who were Haitian or Cape Verdean and were just legitimately confused by these race ethnic categories. It did not apply to them. And I would say, and here's why it matters is when you ask somebody a question like that and they feel like they're not reflected on the form, there's not a place for them to answer, they feel like this form wasn't designed for me anyway.
Right.
Right.
Right. And it's usually like the third question.
Yeah, right. Like if I come across,
birth and
if
race.
somebody asks for race ethnicity and they say check one box, I am done. I am done with that entire survey.
Right.
That is how little you care about reflecting me and my survey. Even though I'm a researcher and I understand why you did it that way, I will not fill out that form anymore.
Yes.
I look at it as like, well, obviously it's not me you wanted to hear from.
Right. So let's throw it out.
So
oh my God. The next couple of weeks is going to be so exciting.
It is. So we've got amazing guests over the next few weeks.
Yes.
We're talking about a continuum from, just like how do we take the information that we are collecting and make sure that it's useful in the community that we're using it in, right? How do we take data and present it in ways that more people, so data visualization and data presentation has gotten so complicated that people with masters and PhDs read it and nobody else does, right? Which often means, as we're trying to diversify our organizations and have more people with lived experience in leadership in our organizations, we've got this structure that they can't really participate in, right? So how do we even just present data so that people can use it, right? How do we simplify that and make it usable? All the way to how do we just completely redefine program evaluation and build something that is rooted in the values and the cultures of the individuals and the communities and the cultures that we're serving.
Oh, wait. Wow. Yeah. All right. So we have come to the end. We went a little over because we could talk about this all day. And I want to say thank you to our viewers today for joining the conversation, and we'll see you all next week at the same time. Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody.